Good evening, everyone. I'm Anita Slate, a library assistant here at River Falls Public Library. Tonight, we are so excited to host authors Mary Logue and Pete Hautman. I'm assuming that's how you say it. Okay, it is for tonight. Mary's website says she is an author, poet, and rug maker. She was born in Minnesota, but is probably most specifically known around this area as the author of her Claire Watkins Wisconsin Coulee mystery series. She has also written poetry, nonfiction, many magazine articles and reviews, French translations, young adult and juvenile books, including the novel Dancing with an Alien. It was an ALA Best Book for Young Adults, and the best-selling picture book Sleep Like a Tiger, which I noticed is in many translations, even Turkish.
And Catalan.
It won a Caldecott and a Zolotau Honor Award. She co-wrote 3 youth mysteries with Pete, and her latest historical mysteries are The Streel and The Big Sugar. And I hope you purchase them at the end. Pete was born in California, but raised in Minnesota. He attended the Minneapolis College of Art and Design and the University of Minnesota for 7 or 8 years total?
Yeah.
Okay. No degree, though.
No degree.
He has worked many unusual jobs. On his website, there's a quote that says he knows a little bit about nearly everything and a great deal about absolutely nothing. That's part of why he became a writer. He's since written over 30 novels for adults, young adults, and children. His title, Godless, won the National Book Award for Young People's Literature. His newest title is The Rat Queen. In his spare time, he likes to read books, hunt mushrooms, cook, take naps, talk with Mary, watch movies, nap, inline skate, bike, and nap some more. If you are watching this event online and you have questions, please write them in the comments section, and we will get to them before the end. They will also be selling copies of some of their books at the end, so please stick around. Without further ado, please welcome Mary and Pete. So I guess before we start, why don't you just give us your own little intro or where you want to talk from.
Well, you didn't mention how Mary and I met.
No, I don't know that.
Well, back in 1990, after years and years of telling my friends that I wanted to write books, I thought maybe I should actually start working on that. And I'd never taken a writing class. I took all the other classes that they had to offer at the university, but somehow I never got into the writing classes. So now I should take a writing class. There's an organization in Minneapolis called the Loft Literary Center. A really wonderful organization. They offer a wide variety of classes on writing, ranging from poetry to memoir to fiction to business writing, all kinds of other things. And so I looked through the class schedule. I was interested in writing fiction, and there were 3 fiction classes being offered. And I hadn't heard of any of the people teaching the classes. So I went and I got books by all 3 of them, and I read them. And there was one book that really knocked me out. It was called The Red Lake of the Heart by someone named Mary Logue. For some reason, I thought it was Native American. I don't know why I thought that.
Lake.
Oh, Red Lake, that's what got me onto that, okay. Anyway, it was Mary teaching the class, and I learned a lot. I met a lot of interesting people, and when the class finally was over after 7 or 8 weeks, she asked me out for the worst date of my life. It was, she heard that I was interested in science fiction, so she decided we should go see the Russian version of Solaris, which is about 4 hours long, in a theater, uptown theater, where the heating had failed, and we were freezing, and we didn't know each other well enough to say, can we just get the heck out of here? Anyway, it worked. We've been together ever since. We're each other's editors and cheerleaders and so forth. And That's how I became a writer. And incidentally, after this class, there were 7 of us in the class, including me and Mary, who decided to keep meeting on an informal basis and form like a critique group. And every single one of us had published books within the next 5 years. It was just a tremendous professional support group, great education. So that's why there's 2 of us here tonight.
Do you want me to?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in here. He got it pretty much right. After it was, I won't even go into some of the other things that happened, like the restaurant we went to, they were putting the chairs up on the table as we were trying to order food. I mean, it just went on and on. But when he dropped me off, I thought, well, that was the worst day of my life, but I'd go out with him again. Maybe he'd go out with me, so. I think I'm gonna, I think I'm well known in this area for my my Claire Watkins mystery series. And the way that came to be was that I lived in New York. I'm from here. I went to school here. I lived in New York for 4 years. And when I moved back, I was kind of like, why does everybody go north? I think I'll go south. And I went down to Stockholm, Wisconsin, and found the most rundown farmhouse I could find, with the ceilings caving in and the bats having free reign, and I bought it. And still have it. I got it just a year or 2 before Peter, which I'm not sure he's happy about. But anyways, and both that, one of the things that was so interesting to me about, I knew I had written a couple mysteries, and I was kind of fascinated about a more rural community. And especially after coming back from New York for 4 years, it really hit me more, I think. And just how information flows through a small community and what it would be like. You know, I got to be pretty friendly with the sheriff of Pepin County. And again, it's really important when you're doing a mystery series to really talk to the cops in the area, that because, you know, policing is so different in the big city compared to the smaller communities, and much more friendly usually. Also, the thing that was kind of interesting to me too was my main character in that series is a cop. And what's really striking to her, she has moved down from Minneapolis, because I had, and I wanted to write about that. But she realizes that in Minneapolis, she would be working on murders, but she wouldn't know the people. And in a small community, she not only would know them, she would know, you know, their parents and their, you know, the family and the church they went to. And so it's a really different feeling. And I was really fascinated about writing about that. So I wrote 9 books in the series and loved writing every one of them. As everyone, the first book I wrote, I actually left town because I was afraid that people in Stockholm would be upset with me. But we went down to Tucson for the winter. But in fact, I find that I have since been told that they're always guessing who I'm murdering off next. I'm kind of sorry I quit writing it, because there's a couple people that really I could use for target practice. But anyway, then I wrote a book about my grandmother, and who is of Irish descent. And in so doing, I found out 2 things. One is that I love research, and 2 is that I was fascinated by what it would have been like in 1880 to leave Ireland as a 16-year-old girl. And it would, the only thing I think we might have that would be comparable would be to go to Mars, because there's no communication. There's no, you know, telephone. There's no Skype. And so actually in my first book, The Streel, when Bridget, and I loved driving by Bridget, the St. Bridget here. It's spelled differently, but when Bridget and her brother Seamus leave Ireland because the landlord is paying them to leave, the family has a wake for them because they will never see them again. And this was actually based on real, again, the research I did, that there wasn't money, there was just, they knew that they were off to Mars, and that they would probably never have a chance to see them again. So I'm gonna read a quick poem, and then you wanna.
Did you have some?
Oh yeah, Juliet.
I asked her earlier if there is going to be any more Claire books.
Oh yes, yes. I can't promise there will be, but I did start another one. Partly because, and this doesn't, I hope, spoil anything for anybody that hasn't read the complete 9-book series, but at the end, I really felt like I had them settled down. I mean, Claire was married with Rich, they were relatively happy, and her daughter Meg goes off to college, and Claire becomes the sheriff, so kind of all is well in the world of Putnam County. Well, then we in Stockholm had quite a bit to do a year or two ago with the frack sand mining trying to come in. And so all of a sudden, of course, my mind went wild, and I envisioned this scene, opening scene in the next book, where Meg comes back from college kind of politicized. And the frack sand miners are trying to get to where they're mining right on the bluff. And Meg is protesting, and her mother, Claire, has to arrest her daughter for protesting. I thought that would be a great opening scene, but that's only how far I've gotten. So.
You mentioned you met her at the Loft Literary Center, and Mary, you've taught other places too. Hamlin, have you done other places as well?
Yeah, I taught at the U. I taught in Poets and Writers in both Minnesota and then up in New York City also. I taught in that same program, which is going into the high schools and schools. So, yeah.
Why don't you read your poetry?
Yeah.
Your sister also is part of that book, correct?
Well, yes and no. I mean, my sister is on the back cover. But my other sister, Robin, took the picture. And I have done a book with Dodie, which is probably what you're thinking.
Yes.
And actually, we're working on it. My sister Dodie is an artist and does wonder. She's got a show right now at the Bloomington Arts Center that's absolutely fabulous. And so she and I are working on a book where I look at a painting of hers and I write a poem to go with it. It's called Ekphrastic. And so anyways, but this poem is explains somewhat why I started this new series. It's called A Narrow Road. There's a road with only enough room for one car. If you meet, oh, by the way, we're in Ireland. If you meet another, you must stop, get out, and discuss who saw the last white spot. On this small road is a church with a graveyard, the bones in some quarters piled up of families on families. The others left this country of peat fires and oiled wool and sweet music when the potatoes turned black as they were pulled from the ground and the good food was shipped to England. They went on creaking ships, coffined ships, they crammed on and hoped. And they dreamed of clouds of deep cream, beds of down, and grandchildren who would have children, who would someday drive down the narrow roads of a green, green country to find out what had been left behind. And so when I was doing the research on my grandmother, I was just kind of fascinated to learn more about why and how my ancestors got here. And I think it's like almost most immigrants to America, it isn't necessarily that they want to leave their countries, but for war or famine or plague or no land, they're forced out. And that certainly was the case with them. But I've been back to Ireland, and that poem is from my first trip to Ireland, where I was with my mother, my two aunties, another aunt, and then my sister Dodie and my two cousins. We were all in the van, and it was a wild trip. So
Tell us a little bit more about your new books right now.
So again, I was, it's so interesting the way things happen, where you're just finishing up one project and kind of wiping your brow that you've written 9 books, and then I launched into this next one. I really was, because I found how much I love doing research, I really wanted to be able to use that more in the next book I wrote. So the first book is called The Streel. This is the first book in the series. It opens up in Ireland, in Galway. It goes to New York City. Then it goes to St. Paul, where Bridget, the main character, works for a family like the Hill family. I give them a different name. And then she goes on to Deadwood, South Dakota, where her brother and some friends have started mining. So the majority of this book is set in Deadwood. It's called The Streel, partly because, again, when I was doing this research on my grandmother, I found that I had Gaelic words in my vocabulary that I didn't know about, and I didn't know they were Gaelic. I knew what they meant, kind of, and one of them was the Streel. And Streel, my mother would, if my sisters and I weren't well put together when we were going out, she would look at us and say, "Oh, you can't go out like that, you look like a Streel." And come to find out, it means something like harlot, woman of the street. Yeah, thanks, Mom. But I'm not sure she knew what it meant, because her mother called her, she grew up in Western Minnesota. And so it's interesting to have these words that kind of come with the family, but you don't even know their family. So I love that idea of having these are mysteries, they're historical mysteries set in the 1880s. And I love having the mystery right on the front of the cover. So you have to turn the page to at least find out what the title means.
Just before we started, you had mentioned about the tintype that the cover came from.
Yeah, so, when Pete and I are working on books, we really get to know our characters. I mean, I felt like I knew Claire really well. She wasn't me. Sometimes I got asked that, but I had a really good picture of her. Well, I antique a little bit, and I was antiquing one day when I had just started writing The Streel, and I found this large tintype, which is very unusual. Tintypes are usually like this size. And it was of this young woman who looked to me like my main character, looked like Bridget. So you can't see all of her, but the cover is the tintype that I brought to my editor and said, I don't know if you want to use this, but this is what I think Bridget looks like. So, yeah.
Are you ready to talk, Pete?
Always.
Always. Tell us about your newest book, The Rat Queen, and some of the other books you have here.
Okay. Well, I brought 3 books, 3 of my recent books, and they're really books intended for younger readers, grades 4 through 8 probably, although I try to make them entertaining for adults as well. The Rat Queen is my most recent one, and I sort of jump around from genre to genre. I've written some mysteries, some science fiction, some fantasy, some
Romance.
And one thing I hadn't really written in genre I hadn't really touched was horror. And horror is a really important genre. A lot of people love it. I read it. I mean, Stephen King is one of my favorites. So I set out to write a horror story, but books don't always go in the direction you think they're going to. And this went more in a fairy tale direction, more of a mystery kind of direction, and the horror sort of fell away. I didn't have nearly as much blood and guts as I had been intending to put in it. I mean, there's only so much blood and guts you could put in a book for 10-year-olds anyway, but so it's kind of a mystery about a girl who grows up with her father, homeschooled in one of the outer suburbs of an unnamed city, which is Minneapolis. And her life is pretty boring. She has a best friend, a girl down the street, another little boy that she hangs out with. But there's some weird things going on, like rats. She sees lots and lots of rats. The neighborhood becomes invaded with rats. And then on her 10th birthday, her father introduces her to a family secret, the Neodema burna, which is a hole in the floor of his study under the rug. And he wants her to, anytime she does anything she regrets, anytime she does anything she feels bad about, says something mean, to write it down on a piece of paper and put it in the hole, and then all her bad feelings will go away. And it works, but it has side effects, as you can imagine. And the side effects eventually take her across the ocean to a small country called Lithuania, where she meets her grandmother for the first time. And it gets very strange from there. It was a really fun book to write. And the best part of writing it was I got to write original fairy tales. So there are nine original fairy tales in the book, which, for each one of those fairy tales that I wrote, I had to read about 50 fairy tales. And that was some of the most entertaining reading I'd done in a long time. It was going back to not just the Grimm brothers, but all the old fairy tale books I could find. There's some fantastic stuff there. Now, I started out as a writer writing adult crime comedies, like Dan and I were talking about the Mortal Nuts crime comedy set at the State Fair, and I wrote altogether, I think, 8 of those. But at some point, I wrote a book that, because of the way the plot worked, I had to keep making the main character younger and younger and younger. And when I finally finished the book, my agent said to me, "Well, you've written a young adult novel." And I said, "What's a young adult novel? Is that like for people in their 20s? He said, no, it's for teenagers. And I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, this is a young adult novel. It's called Mr. Was." Mm-hmm. And so I published it as a young adult novel, and it did quite well, and I got to start getting invited to schools to talk to kids, which was a terrifying experience. I found that I was not accustomed to public speaking, especially to, the first time I went, they had me in a gymnasium, last hour on a Friday, and the entire gymnasium floor was covered with 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, and they were all squirming. This is Friday. They're sitting on the floor. It's uncomfortable. They're whispering to each other, and I was sitting up in front of them, and I started getting nauseated, seasick. It was just this undulating mass of young energy. Anyway, things got better after that, and as I spent more time with these young readers, I started thinking, "Hi, Catherine." I started thinking about what reading was like when I was younger. That was, when you could get after you had to turn the lights out, get a flashlight, duck under the covers, and finish that Nancy Drew book. I mean, it was a totally immersive experience as a 10, 11, 12-year-old to read. And I thought, the more I thought about it, the more I started remembering what it was like to be that age, and the more I wanted to write for audiences like that. So, these are all books for younger readers. This is a mystery novel. Apparently, I didn't know it was a mystery till it won an Edgar Award. But it's sort of a fantasy. It doesn't start out as a fantasy, but there's a point at which these two best friends, a boy and a girl, who consider themselves to be soulmates, they're like 9 years old. Something happens, something from the past, some family memories happen, and then suddenly their world is torn apart. And in his world, she's disappeared. And everybody thinks she's been kidnapped. They got her face up on billboards and stuff. She's just gone. Nobody can find her. And in her world, the same thing happened, only he's the one that disappeared. But they still find a way to communicate with each other. And so the story's about what they have to do to repair the rent in the world. Now, I want to just talk about this very briefly. This is my best-selling book, by the way. It's called Slider, and it's about a boy who can eat really fast. It's a boy, a middle child in a family where his youngest brother is severely autistic and his older sister is an overachiever in college. Very high-strung overachiever. And he's a good kid, and he doesn't get much attention from his parents because he doesn't need it. They rely on him to take care of his younger brother, and he's passing his classes, and that's good enough. He just doesn't get a lot of attention, but he does have one talent, and that's that he can eat a 16-inch pizza in 4.5 minutes. Well, something happens, and he becomes desperate for money, and the only way he can get the money is to enter an eating contest. So he starts training.
One of the other ones I was going to ask you about is Godless, which won an award. Can you explain about that one?
Yeah, Godless is a pretty close to an autobiographical novel. I mean, I'm not in it as a character, and most of the things in the novel didn't really happen, but it's about a Catholic 15-year-old kid who was starting to have a lot of questions about his religion. And his parents are very uptight about it, and nobody's really answering his questions or anything. And so he's sitting around with his friends one day under the water tower in St. Louis Park, and he's complaining about, this is terrible, I gotta go to church every single Sunday, and my mom always serves fish on Friday, and nuns are really scary, and he's got all the usual complaints that a kid has. And his friend Dan, who's Lutheran, says, "Yeah, you got it easy. Try being the preacher's kid." Says, I gotta sit through 2 services every Sunday, and my dad's constantly reminding me of how I'm an example to my peers, and so forth. And his Jewish friend is complaining about some of the dietary restrictions and having to eat things like gefilte fish, and about his great aunt's always pinching his cheek. And anyway, they decide to start their own religion. And so, what are we going to worship? Who's our God? Well, the water tower. So they establish a mock religion worshiping a water tower. And it's all fun and games at first, but then when they try to recruit more people to their religion, things start to go wrong.
Another question that I wanted to ask is, when you start writing, do you have characters in mind, settings in mind, situations? All of the above?
Yeah. So for me, it's almost kind of hard to talk about because I am working so often in my head. And one of the things I taught at Hautman University, and I always told my students, give yourself credit for that time. You know, we think that writers are always in front of the computer or the typewriter, but going for a walk, driving to River Falls from the cities, I love thinking about my books while I'm driving. So I tend to, when I get the kernel of an idea, then I tend to play with it. And for almost a year, usually before, and I'm getting scenes, I'm starting to know where the book starts, I'm starting to know where the story ends, I think I know where it ends, and other characters. So I'm just, it's like, it's a little bit like a quilt kind of coming together. I've got pieces of it, and when either I'm done writing the book that I was writing while I was starting to think about the next one. So there's overlap there too.
In your new series, The Streel and the Big Sugar, those are very, very place-oriented books. You know, from Ireland to New York to Minneapolis to Deadwood to Cheyenne and then maybe Salt Lake City next. You had an idea about that almost before Bridget's character developed, right? I mean, her character developed out of her voice and situation in Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
But all your books aren't like that. I mean, some of your books, they start
It's
with
character. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I was so interested in this idea of what it would have been like for anyone to come here as an immigrant and to go across the country. So that is what I always imagined Bridget was going to do. But what's been interesting about that too, going back to your question, is I can do a lot of research. I read diaries from women of this time period. I read the books that women of this period would be reading. I read the books that are written about this period. I read letters and journals and newspapers and just more and more to get the magazines, the clothes that women wore, to get kind of immersed in that. But I have to go to the plays. Now, I was lucky with Cheyenne. Well, I was lucky, no, not Cheyenne, with Deadwood. Certainly I knew the Twin Cities and I knew New York and I knew Ireland, but I had never been, but with Deadwood, why I was lucky was because Peter was a poker player, and the only place he could play poker at that time that I started writing the Streel was in Deadwood, South Dakota. So I had been to Deadwood, and while he was losing money playing poker, I was scouring the museums and kind of getting the history and the sense of the town. Very interesting. So then I went to Cheyenne. So I need that place. I need to see it, feel it.
One of the things about you, Pete, I was reading, things on your website, and you have an awful wicked sense of humor. And I'm sure there's a lot in your books too.
Thank you. I think
It is.
this book is very funny. I will say that. These have funny aspects to them. But yeah, I mean, I get bored if I'm not able to amuse myself. And I remember first time I read anything in public, it was in Mary's class. And I'd written a scene that I thought was pretty darn funny, but it was also a dramatic scene. It was from The Mortal Nuts. And so I was pretty scared, but I started reading it, and people started laughing. And they were laughing in all the right places. Okay, okay, I know I got a weird sense of humor, but I'm not the only one.
One other thing that you like to do is rug hooking, and I know if you go to Mary's website, marylogue.com, you will see some of her work. How do you have time for all that?
Well, a couple things. One is, as I say often, I write during the day and I hook at night.
So you are a student.
But yeah, and I do mainly write during the day. When I was younger, I could write at night, but if I write at night now, I don't go to sleep. You know, it's just, I'm just too stirred up thinking. So hooking actually really calms me down. I will say one thing that's really similar about both. So I rug hook my own designs, which is a little unusual. A lot of women that do handwork and do rug hooking buy patterns, and they're lovely, they're wonderful, but I just have always done my own. So in the same way that I'm often going for a walk with the dogs and thinking about the next scene, oftentimes I'm also, or instead thinking about, well, what could I do for, you know, what do I want to do? I've got, you know, all of a sudden I'm totally interested in puffins because I'm going to be going back to Iceland. And I've got this idea for a series of rugs of puffins that deconstruct.
Now, you didn't mention the other thing you do, which is selling counterfeit Viagra.
Gotta live somehow, you know what I'm saying?
Someone has, I don't know what the word is, spoofed or something, Mary's
No, they
website.
stole.
Well, what happens if you go to Google and you type in Mary Logue, and then a link to Mary Logue's website comes up. If you click on that link, you go to a phony pharmaceutical site. But if you go to your menu bar and you type in marylogue.com, then it'll take you to her legitimate site. And we haven't figured out how to correct this problem, but. And,
I hope I'm selling a lot of Viagra, that's all I gotta say.
I'm glad I went to the right side. Who are some of the people that you read and enjoy?
I used to be able to say, I was the mystery writer reviewer for the Star Trek for a number of years, and I also was a judge for the Edgar Awards. I read a lot of mysteries, 250 for the Edgar Awards, yeah. And I still read a lot. I'm finding lately, someone that I like mysteries that I want to use, I don't know that I want to use the word teach, but bring you into a world or a time or a place that you would not have gone yourself, and kind of you learn about that. I like that feeling. So a series I'm reading right now is by Ellie Griffiths. She's a British writer, and the main character is an archaeologist of bones, and they're on the cozy side, but they're very interesting. So I am not totally into cookie cutter mysteries, but I do like these. But I've always said I like what really got me started was the triumvirate of Dashiell Hammett, Ross McDowell, no, who am I? Raymond Chandler,
Ross Thomas.
Ross McDowell. Both of the Rosses. Anyways, and then the British writers, Frances Byfield and Agatha Christie and all the women, Dorothy Sayers. Those are some of my old-time faves.
I just read a couple of books that I'm pretty excited about by an author named Sarah Gailey, Gailey. Well, you know, one of them is, they're both mysteries. One called The Echo Wife is a mystery that has a sort of a science fictional aspect to it. And the other one, Magic for Liars, is a mystery that takes place in a school for magicians. It's nothing like Harry Potter at all. But I just posted something like this on Facebook. What I really like about her is, a lot of times when people recommend books to me, they go, oh, well, you write like Donald Westlake or Elmore Leonard or you should read this guy and this guy and this guy. And I go, I don't really want to read books that are like the books that I write. I like reading books that blow my mind, that it's like I go, how did they do that? How did she write that? How did she just write 3 pages about a woman getting dressed and putting on makeup that had me completely riveted? It's just, it feels like magic to me. So I really enjoy that. I also really like a Scottish writer who's read, I think, the 5th book of his I read his name is Magnus Mills. And his best-known book was a Booker finalist called The Restraint of Beasts. And you think my sense of humor is wicked. This guy's sense of humor is so wicked you don't even know if he's trying to be funny or not. I mean, it's just really, really deadpan. So I like stuff that is outside of my comfort zone, I guess. That's what.
You both have written so many different types of books. Is there anything that you haven't, that you would still like to try?
I
Besides horror.
still want to write a horror novel. Yeah.
I don't want to write a horror novel. I have tried to write a couple of screenplays, and I wouldn't mind writing a screenplay. When I write a screenplay, for some reason, I really see the movie. I mean, it's really different than when I write a book. It's very, very visual.
Are there any questions online or out in the audience tonight you can think of?
I'll give them,
Okay.
I would say, if you haven't read a book by either of them, try one. Because if you like it, they're consistent, and not all writers are consistent. I just read the new S.A. Cosby book, and I read an earlier one and couldn't finish it a couple of years ago. I just couldn't believe this one was getting these reviews.
Which was this?
It's
S.A.
called All
Cosby.
Sinners Bleed is the new one, S.A. Cosby,
Mhm.
and it blew my mind. So we're like that, and I've probably read 4 of yours and 4 of yours, and so they're nice, and they've got a good consistent level, so try one, because you like that, you like the others.
Well, I kind of did that. I had heard your name. I worked in the high school library here in River Falls for 25 years. So I had heard the name, but when you work in a library all day with kids, you really don't do much reading at home. So I saw one. Oh, my cleaning lady came and she had 3 books for me. She came and she said, oh, I have a friend who reads these books and I know you like to read. So that was a Claire Watkins. So library. I went to the front page that showed me the order in which they should be read. And I thought, whoo! So I had the first 3. Then I now have 3 more from the library. And so I haven't got 9, but I'm gonna get them. And I haven't read yours, but I
Thank
like
you.
Darren Wesley, so I'm gonna have to.
He's better than Wesley.
Is he better than
He's
Wesley?
funnier.
Oh, good. Because I read in bed, and it used to drive my husband crazy because I'd be laughing. And the bed would shake. He's gone now, so I can read anything I want, even if the bed shakes, it won't bother anybody but me.
Just for the online people, just if you didn't hear, Dan mentioned that your books are all consistent. So just read one and then you'll start to read the others.
Consistently good, she means,
Yes,
yes.
consistently, yes.
That sounds, could be left hand, no, it's
Yeah.
consistently good.
You can
solid.
rely on, I forget your name, but Irene said that she just started the Claire Watkins mysteries and is hooked and is ready to read 9. The last few.
I have to get them all, I'm only on 4, I've got 2 more. You need to have them at the library, Stephen.
Okay, we'll talk to John. As a child, what did you like to read or do? Did you always think you were going to be a writer, Mary?
I did, but this is really a plug for writers in the schools. You know, I didn't know you could be one. I mean, I read voraciously. I mean, I got in trouble for reading. I read, my teachers, I would finish the work and they all let me read as soon as I was done with what. So yes, that I was the girl walking down the hall reading. I was the girl on the school bus reading. But I didn't know you could be such a thing. So actually, that's why I got a French degree, was I thought I would translate, because that would be close. But then I took a class in poetry at the U and got really encouraged. And then once I had written a lot of poetry, I decided I had some bigger stories to tell. But again, it's so important. I see what happens to kids when I, as a writer, go into the schools and they see this as a possibility, that they're real people. You know, I knew doctors, I knew lawyers, I knew teachers, I knew garbage men, but I didn't know you could be a writer.
I forgot what I was going to say, but I wanted to mention, I actually ran into Mary last fall at a mystery conference. And she was delightful. We were in the book room picking up free books, and as you do. And she was very kind and said, oh, I would love to do an event at River Falls Library. So I'm glad you guys came here. You taught several places. Who taught you?
Right. Yeah, I think, I do really think kind of reading taught me in a way. My mother was a real mystery reader, and my father was quite a good reader. And we had a whole wall in our living room that was books. I mean, literally floor to ceiling. So, and I remember a friend, as the Logue sat out in the warm sun, all with their sun hats on, reading books. And he said, a day in the country with the Logues, it's just, so I think that's partly, you just have to read and you kind of absorb it, but I had good teachers. And I taught Michael Dennis Brown at the U. I had really good teachers, both in the French department and English. But the thing that really helped me was Sleep Like a Tiger. So I was lucky enough to teach at Hamlin in their low residency program, Writing for Children. And it is an amazing program. And what's scary about it is that as a teacher, as one of the lecturers, everyone is watching you. All your faculty members are sitting there watching you give this lecture. It's the scariest thing I've ever done. But that meant I got to sit in on all their lectures, and many of them were picture book writers. So I learned how to write a picture book, and I did really well with Sleep Like a Tiger. But we're just still learning. I learned from Peter, especially when we critique each other's work, but we usually wait a while, like we'll show each other the first chapter just to say, am I nuts? And then we usually don't show the other person until we're all the way through, because you can only read a book, really, really, really read a book once, but, and give it that, really figure out how you move through the book, which is what's important. But Peter forgets that he knows me and loves me. And he can be a little bit, that wicked humor that you've been talking about, yeah, just take off the last word, and that's what I get sometimes. And it is really, really helpful. But sometimes I have to just take some deep breaths. But I love being edited, actually.
Did you want to read from your book? Mary got a chance to read one of her
I
poems.
was thinking about reading a fairy tale.
Okay.
It's probably about 4 minutes.
This is Annie, or Annika, and she's asked her father to read her a fairy tale from a book of Lithuanian fairy tales that he brought from the old country. Once upon a time, he began. What time? Annie asked. A very long time ago. Before I was born? Before even I was born. Now hush and let me read, or we'll be here all night. Annie pretended to zip her lips shut. Papa smiled and settled back in his chair. Once upon a time, there was a changeling. What's a changeling? Annie asked. You talk a great deal for a little girl who has just zipped her lips, he observed. Sorry, if you listen, all will be revealed, okay? Annie double zipped her mouth shut. The changeling was very, very old, and he'd learned to change his shape. That's why he was called a changeling. He could be an elephant, a fish, a tree, or anything else. Why would he want to be a tree? Annie asked. Papa sighed. I don't know that he did want to be a tree, but he could turn into one if he wanted. You see, the changeling was a silly-looking creature, no taller than a goose. His head was bald, but the rest of him was covered with hair the color of straw. He had little round green eyes, a long pointy nose, ears as big as soup bowls, and only 3 fingers on each hand. And his feet looked like dog paws. Annie giggled. You laugh, and that is exactly why no one ever saw him in his natural form. He knew people would make fun of the way he looked, so he was always changing into other things. One day the changeling was eating blackberries in his favorite berry patch when an old woman came along carrying a basket. He ducked down so she would not see him. The woman began to pick the berries. The changeling wanted the berries for himself, so he turned himself into a bear and rose up onto his hind feet and roared. Papa roared that last word. Annie screamed, then laughed. Papa chuckled. You are a very scary bear, she said. Thank you. The old woman screamed even louder than you. She dropped her basket and ran away, and the changeling ate all the berries she had picked. Then he ate every last berry in the patch because he was a bear now, and bears are always hungry. When all the berries were gone, he curled up in the middle of the berry patch and fell asleep because bears are also very sleepy. Sometime later, the changeling was awakened by a tinkling sound. He sat up. While he slept, he had returned to his usual shape, so he had to stand up on his dog paw feet to see over the berry bushes. A little boy was leading a goat down the forest path. The goat had a bell around its neck. The changeling was angry at being awakened, so he turned himself into a tiger and jumped onto the path right in front of the boy. The boy yelled and ran off into the woods, leaving the goat behind. Because the changeling was a tiger, and tigers are even hungrier than bears, he ate the boy's goat. The whole thing, Annie asked? Everything except the bell, Papa said. Well, that seems very rude. Changelings are not known for their manners. Now, after eating all those berries and an entire goat, the changeling decided to go for a stroll. He kept his shape as a tiger just in case he came across something else he could eat. And sure enough, down by the brook, he spotted a little girl sitting on a stump eating a jam sandwich. What kind of jam? Strawberry, of course, your favorite. And do you know what else? The little girl's name was the same as yours, Annika. You're making that up. I'm not. Annika was exactly your age, and she was extremely perturbed when the giant tiger came padding out from the woods. But not for the reason you might think. Do you know what Annika said to the tiger, who was really a changeling? And he shook her head. She said, "You're not a real tiger." The changeling growled, "If I'm not a tiger, then what am I?" "There are no tigers hereabouts," the girl said. "Besides, real tigers can't talk. You're just a silly changeling." "I am a changeling, it's true." The changeling bared his ferocious tiger teeth. "But you will not think me so silly when I eat you." Now, you and I know that the changeling was embarrassed by his real appearance, which is why he was always making himself into other things. Annika knew it as well because her father had warned her about such creatures. "I would prefer not to be eaten by a tiger that is not really a tiger," she said. "But I suppose it would be too hard for you to change into something else." "Not at all," said the changeling. "Observe." And with that, he transformed himself into a big gray wolf with long fangs and hungry yellow eyes. "You see, I'm a wolf now, and I'm going to eat you and the rest of your jam sandwich." "Changing into a wolf is easy," the girl said. "And how about this?" The wolf changed into a gorilla. "Gorillas eat only fruits and leaves," the girl said. The changeling was frustrated. It was no fun to eat a girl who wasn't even afraid. He made himself into a rhinoceros. The girl laughed at his nose. He tried being a crocodile. She told him she could outrun a crocodile. He transformed into a snorting bull with long, sharp horns. "I had beef for supper last night," she said. "Maybe I will eat you." The changeling snorted and stamped his hoofs in frustration, then turned himself into the same bear that had frightened away the old woman. That's pretty good, the girl admitted. Do you know what would really impress me? What? Asked the changeling. If you could turn into a bug. Ha! Bugs are easy. What sort of bug? I bet you can't turn yourself into a little beetle, the girl said. The changeling could not resist the challenge, so he turned himself into a beetle. Not just any beetle, but a beautiful golden scarab beetle, which he was certain would impress her. The little girl looked at the tiny golden beetle by her feet, then stomped on it. And she stomped and stomped and stomped until it was completely gone. Annie waited for more, but Papa simply sat with the open book in his lap and smiled up at the wall books. It's a little longer than I thought it was going to be.
We're almost to the end of our time, but are there any questions online? Okay. Any other questions out in the audience? No? One of the last things I was going to ask is how much editing do you need to do, or do you both have, like, how many drafts do you do? I guess it depends on the book.
Many. The way I write, and I do not recommend this to anyone, is I write a chapter or two, and then I go back and I reread what I wrote, and then I change it. And then I write a little bit more, and then I go back and I read everything I wrote and I change it. So I can have 40 revisions of a book by the time I finally get to the end of it. The early chapters will be very heavily edited, and the latter chapters might be a little bit sloppy.
I'm somewhat similar, but I do usually, I try to write about 3 or 5 to 5 pages a day when I'm cranking on a book. And I try, and since I live with a writer, and we write, you know, Saturday and Sunday don't mean anything to us. Weekends are just the same, and we write. And so it keeps me, if I write 3 to 5 pages a day, it keeps me in the book, in the world of the book. And I start out my writing session by going back over the 3 pages from the day before, partly to just get me back into the flow of it. I'm an editor. I worked for a number, Grey Wolf and Simon & Schuster out in New York. And so I both really admire and appreciate a good editor. And I have actually had a couple books that have not been edited, which has scared me. And I think it's kind of a newer trend in publishing where editors are more acquiring oriented than they are actually. You know, we used to hear these wonderful stories where they'd find some old, some book and just transform it and see. That doesn't really happen anymore. They just want something that they have to do no work on and can go right out the door. So I don't know if that answers your question.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Pleasure.
And continued best wishes on your future endeavors. For more info on any of Mary and Pete's activities, go to www.marylogue.com, not the other website, and www.petehautman.com. And for more details on our future events at the library, go to riverfallspubliclibrary.org and click on library events. Your support means a lot, and have a great rest of your evening. Thank you all. Thanks.